Welcome to your annual Right to Know workshop. The goal of this training is to ensure that everyone who works with a hazardous chemical is aware of the hazards and the necessary precautions. Because any school employee may potentially come into contact with a hazardous product, federal and state regulations require training. Therefore, as public employees, all persons who work in New York State schools must attend annual training. The New York State Right to Know law requires that you receive training about exposures to chemicals when you are first hired, annually, and whenever your exposure to a chemical is changed. The Right to Know law requires that a poster be located where employees can easily access information. This poster includes the name of the district contact in the event that you have a question about your potential exposure. This law also dictates that the district needs to provide a written response to employee questions within 72 hours. If not, the requester has the right to refuse further contact with that chemical. In addition, the Federal Hazard Communication Standard regulates chemical safety in schools. It requires a written plan which describes the rights and responsibilities of employers and of the employees, labeling, safety data sheets for chemicals on hand, and employee training. The written plan is available to you upon request. The key to minimizing potentially harmful effects from overexposure to chemicals is to avoid unnecessary exposure whenever possible. Exposures to chemicals can cause two kinds of hazards: physical and health. Health hazards can be acute or chronic. Acute or short-term symptoms present themselves almost immediately. Chronic or long-term exposures do not present immediate symptoms, which can make illnesses more difficult to detect. Physical hazards of chemical exposures are those that occur outside of the body that can produce fire, combustion, reactions, and/or explosions. In order to avoid potential health hazards, it is important to understand the routes of entry that a chemical may take. There are 4 possible routes of entry. They are absorption through skin contact, inhalation, ingestion, and injection. Absorption occurs when skin contacts a chemical and is absorbed into the epidural layers. Inhalation occurs when breathing in a chemical vapor. Ingestion occurs through eating or drinking a chemical, either accidentally or intentionally. Injection or puncture occurs when a chemical enters the body by force. Chemicals may also enter into your body through cuts, scrapes, and cracked skin. Inhalation, ingestion, absorption, and injections are the ways that chemicals can enter your body and may cause some sort of a reaction. Inhalation exposure is most common for adults. Ingestion is the most common exposure for children. Common types of personal protective equipment, or PPE, include chemically resistant gloves, goggles, and face shields. Check with your supervisor the label or the safety data sheet if you are unsure if PPE is required for the task at hand. To prevent exposure when using gloves, always remember to choose the right gloves for the job and to wash your hands with soap and water after use. It is important to notice that some food and chemicals look very similar, as you can see in this photo. It is imperative that chemicals are not stored in containers that are for food use. For example, sport drink bottles, mason jars, pitchers. When using secondary containers, it is important that they are labeled with what the chemical is. All products are required to be labeled in accordance with the GHS standard by the manufacturer. The label should include the following information: product identifier, signal word, hazard statements, precautionary statements, supplier identification including name, address, and telephone number, the pictogram. Signal words indicate the severity of the product's hazard. Danger indicates severe hazards, while warning indicates less severe hazards. Hazard statements descriptions of how the chemical can harm you based on the nature of the product's hazards. The pictograms located in arrow 6 are used to identify hazardous products and are commonly grouped by chemical, physical risk, health risk, environmental risk. In the example above, the flame pictogram indicates the chemical is associated with the following physical hazards: flammable, pyrophoric, self-heating, or is an organic peroxide. The exclamation mark indicates a health risk and acute toxicity. This can include a narcotic effect, respiratory tract infection, among others. The corrosive pictogram is a physical as well as a health hazard that includes skin corrosion, eye damage, and corrosive metals. Precautionary statements are also found on these labels and include ways to avoid exposure to the chemical that you are working with. PPE requirements and best practices would be located in this section. The original manufacturer's label should not be removed. The safety data sheet should always be referred to for more detailed product information. Some examples of pictograms include: the health hazard pictogram indicates that the chemical could be, or a combination of, carcinogens, reproductive toxicity, respiratory sensitizer, target organ toxicity, and aspiration toxicity. The flame pictogram indicates flammables that include pyrophoric, self-heating, emits flammable gas, self-reactives, and organic peroxides. The exclamation mark pictogram includes conditions that could be considered an irritant to skin and eyes, skin sensitizer, acute toxicity, narcotic effects, respiratory tract irritant, and/or hazardous to the ozone layer. The gas cylinder pictogram indicates that gases are under pressure. The corrosion pictogram indicates hazard of skin corrosion, burns, eye damage, and corrosion to metals. The exploding bomb pictogram indicates hazards that are explosive, self-reactive, and/or an organic peroxide. The flame over circle represents oxidizer. The environment pictogram represents that the chemical causes aquatic toxicity. The skull and crossbones pictogram indicates that the chemical causes acute toxicity, meaning that it is fatal or toxic. Safety data sheets follow a uniform 16-section format. These sheets should be read in its entirety prior to using the chemical. Generally, the most relevant sections for you to be aware of are Section 1, Identification. This section includes product identifier, manufacturer and distributor name, address, phone number, emergency phone number, the recommended use, as well as restrictions on use. Section 2, Hazard Identification. This will include all hazards regarding the chemical and the required label elements. This will include pictogram and hazard statements. Section 4, First Aid Measures. This section describes the initial care that should be given by untrained responders to an individual who has been exposed to a chemical, including necessary first aid instructions, depending on route of entry, the most important symptoms or effects, and recommendations for immediate care or special treatment when necessary. Section 7, Handling and Storage. This section provides guidance on precautions for safe handling and general hygiene practices, including not chewing gum, eating or drinking in work areas. It also provides recommendations on safe storage, including incompatibilities as well as specific storage needs such as ventilation. Section 8, Exposure Controls, Personal Protection. This covers exposures limits, engineering controls, and personal protective measures that can be used in order to minimize worker exposure. Section 13, Disposal Considerations. This provides guidance on proper disposal practices, recycling, reclamation of the chemicals or its container, and safe handling practices. Secondary containers are usually smaller than primary containers and can include spray bottles, jugs, or jars. In the event that chemicals are transferred from the original container into a secondary or portable container, the secondary label must contain two key pieces of information: the identity of the chemical, as well as the hazards present. Always refer to the safety data sheet before transferring the chemical into a secondary container to ensure safe handling and storage. There are some exceptions to the secondary labeling requirement. The exceptions include if the material is used within the work shift of the individual who made the transfer, or the individual who made the transfer is in the work area the entire time during use, or the container stays in the work area and in the possession of the worker who filled the container. As a rule of thumb, when in doubt, label it in accordance with GHS requirements. This is important to know as we work with students in varying ages and need to ensure their safety as well as the safety of our coworkers. The Chemical Hygiene Plan and Hazard Communication Plan outlines labeling requirements for your district. If you have any questions or wish to review these plans, please contact your Right to Know designee, your supervisor, your Director of Facilities, or the Chemical Hygiene Officer. The OHM BOCES Safety Office has contracted with a company called MSDS Online that provides you with 24-hour internet access to safety data sheets. If you would like more information on MSDS Online, please feel free to contact your district's Right to Know designee. For more information about this program, please contact your supervisor, the contact listed on your district's Right to Know posters, or the Oneida Herkimer Madison BOCES Safety Office. This concludes your Right to Know training and understanding on chemical labels.